Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on another conversation in continuation of our celebrating 30 years for Franklin India Blue Chip and Prima Fund. Now, this conversation is a little bit of a double barrel celebration. I have a very special guest with me today, Janaki. Not only that, he's been managing the funds now for a period of 16 years, Janaki, if I'm not mistaken. But Janaki recently took over as the head of India Equities. Janaki, first question, how does it feel to take over this legacy? Because this is a very old legacy that's now been handed over to you. So what's the first reaction that came to your mind when you took over?
Thank you, Juzer, and warm greetings to ladies and gentlemen. So Juzer, when I first got this information, obviously one felt that the level of responsibility on your shoulders goes up manifold now. You are responsible for the performance of not only your own two schemes, but also responsible for the effectiveness, the good performance of the overall team, as well as the full bouquet of funds. So a bit intimidating to start with, to be frank. Perhaps over the next 1 week or so, as I digested the news, then I got much more comfortable with the added level of responsibility. Mm-hmm. That's how the initial 1 week, the feelings changed. Right.
But I think, many congratulations once again, and I'm sure you'll have a tremendous run, in this journey. Now, I think moving the conversation to a little more on focusing on the two funds, right? These two funds have completed 30 years, and 30 years is a really long period of time, right? What are the kind of key focus areas when you're managing these funds? I mean, what is it that you really look out for when you're trying to kind of, drive performance for these two strategies?
See, one of the advantages of managing funds at a place like Franklin is that we truly have a long-term oriented thinking approach. And why I am reiterating this at this point is that you look at the last 30 years, we must have gone through multiple crises, and at each point of time it looked as if the next 5-10 years the performance outlook was quite bleak. 93 the fund was started, we had the Harshad Mehta scam broke out quite soon. 97-98 we had the nuclear explosion and then the sanctions. 2000 tech fund bust. 2007 the mother of all crises, GFC, all that stuff. Yeah. So series of crises. Yeah. But still India as a country has done quite well for equity investors, and that is because we have the tailwind of macro growth. Many of us are familiar with Warren Buffett's statements, and Buffett keeps on repeating that he won the ovarian lottery. He was lucky enough to have been born in US during the time where he had some 30-40 years of uninterrupted strong growth. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we are in that equivalent phase in India right now. We have had good growth for 30 years. Probably we are well set for another 20 years of growth. It is this knowledge that gives us the comfort, the certainty to take actions during times of uncertainty. Correct. Where this functions as a very effective anchor, gives you the clarity.
So I think you picked up on an interesting point about the kind of crisis that you've obviously seen in your career in the markets. Tell me one crisis which really made you nervous and one phase which you were really bullish on in the past.
The crisis that really tested my mettle clearly was the global financial crisis, the GFC. And the main reason why it did that was it was spread out over a much longer period of time. Right. See, in contrast, if you look at COVID, at least from a market perspective, the actual pain cost to the society lasted much longer. But from a market perspective, it hardly lasted for a month.
Correct.
March of 2020.
Yes.
If you go back to GFC, the slide started in June, July of 2008 and then went on till March of 2009. And I distinctly remember Prima's NAV came below 100 rupees during that time. Wow. Yeah. And we are at 2000 now. So that gives you an idea. Yeah. That was the crisis that really shook us. Right. And it's good that we had high quality leaders during that time. People like Shiva and Sukumar, they gave enough confidence to the team, right, and they set the example for us to follow. Right. The most exciting period, I would say that in a slightly counterintuitive way, it was 2018 and 19. extremely dull phase in the market.
Okay.
2 years of weak growth in the macro. This is post ILFS crisis, and for 8 quarters the growth kept on sliding down.
Right.
For a stock picker, it was a fantastic period.
Great.
That was a time where you were able to reorient the portfolio,
Right.
prepare the portfolio by buying good quality business at a nice price.
Right.
May not have been good for investors during that point of time, but very exciting for a professional investor.
Correct. So now I'm going to zone in a little bit into these two funds now. So although both these funds have completed 30 years, and that's the big commonality between these two funds, there's still very different strategies and very distinct from one another. For somebody who is perhaps, learning a little bit about Blue Chip and Prima right now, because obviously they've got to know that the funds have completed 30 years, what would be your key unique points that you'd like to mention about each of these funds to somebody who's looking at investing in these funds now?
Clearly, the risk-reward proposition in both these funds is a bit differentiated.
Right.
Blue Chip gives you access to the best-run companies of India. These are large, established businesses. So the level of risk in these businesses is quite low, but because of their size itself, then the growth also will be more moderate. Blue Chip gives you an excellent exposure to that. So on the risk-reward continuum, it's a bit towards the slightly safer level of risk. Prima, on the other hand, gives you exposure to the upcoming companies, which are a bit small in size, but who have the advantage of growth. The handicap there is that they are not yet fully established, so they may actually go through much more volatility in terms of execution, and that is where the advantages of active management come into play. Both are positioned in a very clear-cut form. The value proposition, there is no uncertainty in that, and I think for investors, both offer very good options.
Great. So, I'm going to shift this conversation to something more macro. So, when I joined the organization 12 years back, a lot of people told me that, the Franklin philosophy is very different. And it took me a little while to understand that why is the Franklin philosophy so different from some of the other asset managers, in the industry. And obviously that philosophy runs through not just, fund management, but the way we do business and all our other functions and policies, right? I just wanted to focus a little bit and tell our viewers on the Franklin philosophy when it comes to managing equity assets.
So I'll talk about the philosophy purely from an investment function.
Correct.
Our philosophy is you try to generate returns by investing in good quality businesses. And we have a certain objective ways in terms of classifying what is the quality of a particular business. And our experience, and it's not only our experience, it's the experience of investors globally, is that such an approach gives you a very good chance of generating alpha through the cycle, and more importantly, you do this by taking a lesser level of risk.
Correct.
Now, there are no free lunches in our market, so which means that this approach, it does well through the cycle, but it may not be the best approach in all phases of the cycle. There are some phases of the cycle where it may not do as well as the market. It may be lagging a bit, but it does well through the cycle, and most importantly, again, I want to reiterate here, it does so by taking a lesser level of risk. I think that is where the attraction of this approach is, and B, our ability to follow this on a consistent basis. 30 years, fairly long period, and Prima, for example, has seen 3 portfolio managers. Blue Chip has seen probably 1 more, but there has been a consistency in this approach throughout this.
Absolutely.
That is the comfort that an investor gets, that we are a firm where the investment function is a process driven. We keep on saying this, but what it offers to the investor is that the PMs may change, but the proposition, the positioning of the product, the investment proposition, there is no change in that. What they get is a fairly consistent outcome.
No, I think that's a great point you bring out, because you really highlighted the fact that performance is cyclical, but if you have a very strong process, you will be better placed to really ride out that cyclical nature of performance. Now, look at it from a viewer's perspective or an investor's perspective, right? Because people who are going to be viewing this conversation are largely going to be investors and distribution partners. What would your advice be to them how should they kind of really adapt to this cyclical performance, because cyclicality in performance is part and parcel of investing in equities and over a long period of time. So what's your advice to them in terms of their handling the cyclical nature of performance?
My simple advice is that investors also should choose a philosophy that is in line with their own temperament. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that our philosophy is the optimal philosophy for all variety of investors.
Absolutely.
Some of them may prefer a momentum approach, some of them may prefer a deep value contrarian approach. But you have the mainstay, the bulk of the investors, they want compounding of the returns and also take lesser degree of risk. For such investors, our approach is very well suited. Now, once such investors choose this approach, I think the best way for them to tide over the short-term volatility, limit the behavioral risk during those points of crisis, is to take a longer-term approach. And simple philosophy, simple products, if you execute them reasonably effectively over a longer period of time, I think that outcome has been proven to be much better than many of the exotic.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm just going to go back to, in one of the interviews that Warren Buffett said, that he says that, making money is a very boring process, right? So if you can keep that patience going and don't get unnecessarily excited about what is happening in the outside, you'll probably land up, making a lot more money. Now, I have to tell my viewers, and since we are coming towards the end of this conversation, that, when I joined this organization, my image of Janaki was one very serious, person. I would actually kind of get a little, be very cautious about having a conversation with him. But over the years, obviously, I've had a fun relationship with him. It's been great to know him personally. I don't know if how many of you all know that Janaki is also very, very fond of quizzing. So Janaki, I'm going to put you in a spot over here. You got to ask your best quiz question, and hopefully if people write back to you with the right answer, you can probably give them a prize. So go for it. What's the best quiz question that comes to your mind right now?
Okay. So here goes the question. What is the common thread between Kempla Sanmar, Bangalore Airport, and Catholic Syrian Bank?
Wow. Janaki, when I did this conversation the last time with Avi, my last question to Avi was that, where does he see himself 30 years from now? He says he sees himself on a beach relaxing. I mean, I'm going to ask this question to you. Where do you see yourself 30 years from now? Because the fund will be there, right? But what about yourself personally?
A very straightforward answer. I'm a recreational farmer. Wow. And 30 years down the line, I definitely see myself running a farm on a full-time basis.
Wow. So do you farm at home a little bit and grow some flowers or maybe some vegetables or something in your home garden?
I do, not in Chennai.
Right.
I come from a farming family. Uh-huh. So I go to my farm, which is in Karur, about an overnight's drive from Chennai.
Wow.
And there, of course, I try to grow vegetables largely.
Lovely. Now, this is an aspect of Janaki which I had absolutely no clue. So thank you, Janaki, for giving us one additional facet, of your personality. So not only you're a fantastic quizzer, but you're also an aspiring farmer in the long term, right? Now, ladies and gentlemen, that pretty much gets us to the end of this conversation with Janaki, and I'm sure all of you all will get a lot more opportunities to meet him in person and ask him questions on not just the two funds, but also on farming. And if you have a question on farming, Janaki will be more than happy to answer that question. But once again, it's been a fantastic journey for the two funds. 30 years is a very, very long period of time. And hopefully these funds will be there 30 years down the line, to create and generate wealth for investors looking to invest in these funds even today. So thank you very much, and hope to catch you soon on another interesting conversation talking about these two funds with some other leaders at Franklin Templeton.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Glad for the opportunity.
Lovely.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.